I am sitting here with two very snoozy Labradors, so if you can hear snoring in the background, I promise it's snoring and not farting, even though that's kind of what it sounds like. But I'm having a very chill evening. I am sitting on the sofa with the Labradors. Baby Labrador is right in my lap, which is extremely cute, even if I now can't feel my legs really, but I don't want to move them because she's very settled. And I recently treated myself to Emma Woolly Mammoth Fibre Company's Patreon membership. So for those of you who don't know, Emma Robinson, I think is her surname, is a natural dyer of yarn who lives in, I want to say Northern Ireland. Sorry if that's not right. And she has a YouTube channel called Woolly Mammoth Fibre Company. And that's the brand that she sells her yarn through as well. I've never actually bought any of her yarn, but I would really love to because it always looks gorgeous. And she does these really lovely like winter advent kind of boxes that have like yarn and sort of Irish locally made hot chocolate and candles and ceramics. You can get like a mug and whatnot. Yeah, so they look lovely. They are quite expensive. I mean, rightfully so, because they're obviously all artisanally made products. But one day, you know, when you're like thinking about what your quote unquote rich life looks like, things that you would spend money on, I would absolutely buy a Woolly Mammoth Fibre Company advent box every year if I had spare cash. But her YouTube is sort of a lot of behind the scenes in the natural dyeing studio that she runs, and she does a lot of sourdough baking. And before we moved into this house and had a kitchen renovation project on our hands, I was quite into making bread. I didn't do it overly regularly. I would go through phases where I would make bread fairly regularly and then not do it for months. Mostly what would happen is I'd go through a phase of making bread and then inevitably have a couple of fails and then think, this is stupid. This is so much effort and time and energy. And then I end up with something that's like sad and hard and underproved or overbaked or whatever, and I can just buy nice bread and it's not even that expensive, you know. And so I'd go through a phase of then buying bread for a while, and then after a while I'd be like, this is silly, making bread's not that difficult, I'm going to make some bread, and so the cycle would continue sort of thing. So at the moment in this new to us house, which we've actually been in since October now, which is kind of crazy to think about, we haven't had a functioning oven that whole time, so we had to panic buy an air fryer before we moved in, because the solicitor told us, I think the week before we moved in, that the oven didn't work. The hob worked, thankfully, but we've just got rid of the oven, which was just basically a giant waste of space, and we bought an induction hob from IKEA, the type that's portable, and in the future we're going to use that to cook in the garden. But for now, it'll sort of substitute until we get the kitchen renovation done, which probably won't be till later in the summer, to be honest. So we're just surviving on a 2-ring induction hob, an air fryer and a microwave. And to be honest, that's kind of fine. Like, there are definitely things I miss being able to bake, like bread and most sweet baked goods, to be honest, because I've tried a couple of times to do things like cookies and things in the air fryer, and they're just not the same. So yeah, I've kind of just made my peace with the fact that I'm just not baking sweet things until I get an oven again, and that's fine because I do try to eat vaguely healthily, although I'm sitting here having just eaten a giant piece of chocolate cake after dinner. But I do try and eat healthily, so yeah, it's no bad thing to not have a reason to make cookies. Oh, sorry. Oh, get all the side effects. Sound effects, I should say, not side effects. But I wanted to pop on quickly because I actually, for once in a while, have some creative stuff to talk about, not just gardening and renovation, although renovation stuff has mostly taken up our time recently. We recently had the house rewired, and so the walls are absolutely full of holes, and I'm going around patching them at the moment. I'm probably about halfway through, so yeah, that's an ongoing project. Still got some wallpaper to strip, so yeah, and then we start sort of prepping the walls ready for decorating. Still got carpet to pick out, we're still trying to get quotes for a kitchen and a bathroom, so yeah, the house is just a complete guddle, and if I think about it for too long I get super overwhelmed with how much we've got to do. But in the short term, I made some jam recently, So I've made 2 batches of jam recently. The first batch came out really well. It was a grape kind of jelly in a way that I made with some grapes that a friend of the family gave me. We went out to pick some apples from his apple tree before he moved house, and he showed us around his garden, and he had a polytunnel filled with vines that were like producing grapes and whatnot. So he let me pick some grapes, and I brought them home and processed them into juice. And then that was around the time we moved house, so I just whacked it in the freezer and basically forgot about it. And then in the process of getting ready for the rewire, I was winding the freezer down and the fridge just in case we ended up losing power. I didn't want to have the fridge and freezer chock full of food that we then might end up spoiling. And I found this grape juice at the bottom of the freezer, and I thought, I had processed that to juice with the intent to make jam, and now is maybe a good time to do it. So I made it into jam, and actually came out really well. I was really pleased with it because I hadn't made jam in years. And yeah, I imagine that was kind of beginner's luck, because the second batch I made, which I made yesterday as a rhubarb and ginger jam, did not come out as well. It came out basically way too thick and tacky, which I kind of thought when I was boiling it that it was getting quite thick quite quickly, but the recipe said to sort of boil hard for 10 to 15 minutes, and it probably was maybe 5 minutes before I started noticing that it was getting quite thick, and I was like, well, that can't be right, that's like a third of what the recipe's asked for. So I carried on for probably another 3 to 5 minutes before I was like, no, this definitely looks wrong, it's going way too thick. You know, like in Bake Off where they have to make caramel, and Noel Fielding narrating is like, you know, the secret to making caramel is for it to be a sort of golden brown colour, and then it cuts to like 2 people who are like panic stirring their caramel and it's like black. It was kind of like that, where I was sort of stirring my jam and was suddenly like, this isn't jam anymore, this is like tar. So I stopped it, took it off the heat, did the whole sort of wrinkle test on a frozen plate, and it didn't just wrinkle, it like basically folded in half. So I was like, okay, clearly we're done, let's just pop it in a jar and see what it's like. And I ate some of it today, and it tastes really good. It's like proper sort of sour from the rhubarb, but then sort of sweet and a bit spicy from the sugar and the ginger. So I really like the taste, but yeah, it's like solid. Like you could basically stand a spoon up in the jar, which is a little bit of a bummer because I think that's the only rhubarb I'm going to get this year, despite having, I'm not even sure, I've lost count now, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 5 different rhubarb plants, and I've given away 3, I think, 4. I've given away 4. I don't think I'm going to get much rhubarb this year because I've dug it all up basically. So I dug it up to move it to put in my big raised bed, and then had to replant it. And so it does say you're not supposed to take fruit off it in the first, I think, 2 years after it's been moved, which is fair enough because obviously the plant needs to kind of regain its strength. But the ones that are in the raised bed are doing really well, and they've put on loads and loads of fruit. So I was like, well, I don't really know what to do with this other than pick some of it, because otherwise, like, what are you supposed to do? Just leave it on the plant to eventually go rotten? That feels kind of weird. So I'm going to leave it on the plant. The rest of the fruit I'm going to leave on the plant until the end of the season, and then basically when it starts to look a bit sad and flopped over, I'll pull it off, because I think then if you don't remove it at that point, it can damage the crown. And then one of the plants, the biggest plant, I moved to, I think, in retrospect, an inappropriate area. It was under a big tree, which I think is probably draining a lot of the water from the soil. So it just never really looked that happy. It always looked slightly dehydrated. And I took pity on it recently and moved it, and it looked really sad after being moved. So I thought, oh my God, I've probably killed it. And which was particularly sad because it was the biggest and healthiest of the plants. But it seems to have perked up. The fruit that was on it basically all went sad and rotten, so I removed all that. But it has since regrown one piece of fruit and an associated leaf, so it is definitely still alive. But yeah, I think I'm just gonna leave that one till next year. I don't think there's much more that I can do with that one until next year, and even then it might be like the year after next, you know. And the ones that are doing really well, the ones in the raised bed, are really planted too close together, that you're supposed to give it something like 1 metre per crown, which takes up a ton of space. And I'm basically not going to do that in my raised bed because that would take up like 50% of my raised bed, and I don't like rhubarb that much. But at this point, I don't really have anywhere else to put it, so they're all crammed in quite close together, which is why, partly, I suspect, why it's produced quite small, skinny fruits. But I've harvested some of them, and I figured the rest I'll leave over the winter, and then hopefully by next year I'll have a better idea of what's going on in the garden, and I'll be able to move them to their more permanent location. Because I'd rather use the raised bed for sort of more delicate plants, things that need to be kept up out of dog height. Whereas I feel like rhubarb is robust enough that it could live in a border somewhere. I just need to wait until I work out where, because still a lot of the garden in flux, like waiting for borders or fences or whatever. But anyway, this is not a gardening update for once. I've got myself sidetracked by rhubarb chat, but yeah, I've made grape jelly and rhubarb and ginger jam, and both are edible, so I'm going to count both of those as a success. But the grape jelly was definitely more what you would traditionally think of as what kind of jam should in inverted commas look like. But the rhubarb and ginger jam tasted nice, and ultimately that is the main thing. I have actually been knitting for a while now as well, so I think the last few updates on the podcast I've given have been mostly gardening focused, because I just haven't really been doing much by way of other crafts. But I've sort of got to the point with the garden where I'm kind of limited in how much more I can do with it until we decide some of the bigger plans. So things like we want to put in corten steel edging, but it's going to be quite expensive. The idea is it's going to lift the borders up away from the dogs so that my plants don't get trampled, basically. But it is going to be quite expensive, so that is going to be a next year problem, because we need to prioritise things like kitchens and bathrooms this year, more practical stuff. Which means I've been sort of leaning more into like knitting in my sort of downtime, because when I was thinking more about the garden, I was then gardening during the day and then spending my kind of downtime doing like gardening planning and watching gardening YouTube and reading gardening books, sort of thing. But actually, now that we've decided not to focus on the garden as much this year, just kind of keep alive what I've already got going, which, as a side note, I pruned my tomatoes recently, and they look very good, and I can see little fruits forming. And I have been harvesting my basil, and I've made some pesto, which was amazing. So I've had that as like spreads on sandwiches and pasta pesto with dinner. And I've been harvesting loads of herbs like dill and parsley. There's a really nice ottolenghi. I actually found it originally on TikTok, this recipe, for the sort of 3 months I was on TikTok. It's an ottolenghi like couscous recipe, and I've tried to find it since then, and I'm really struggling, so I can only imagine it's like only available on TikTok sort of thing, which is a shame, because I know I wrote it down in this little like notepad that I got for recipes, and I can't find the notepad at the moment because all our books are packed away in boxes, so I'm just doing it from memory. But you make like a parsley oil, and then do your couscous in some vegetable stock, and then chop some dill through, and then you add like soaked sultanas and like walnuts, I think. And it's really good. It's perfect for lunch. Side note, I've started editing this. I don't know if you noticed in the last episode that there was an intro and outro music, and I've been editing out my ums. Just said it just then, and it's made me realise how frequently I say and now I'm kind of self-aware about it. I feel like I'm saying it even more, and I'm thinking about future Amy, who's going to have to edit all these ums out of the podcast and is going to be annoyed at myself. But it's hard not to. So anyway, yes, I'm very much enjoying harvesting my herbs and cooking with them. But because I'm not spending as much time sort of thinking about the garden, I've been knitting more, which has been really nice. So I'm currently finishing off my last Sophie shawl, which I had planned to give to my mum, but I'm not sure the colours are quite right. So it's a sort of hot pink Sophie shawl with blue tips to use up the blue that was left over from my Barbara balaclava. And I really like the colour combo, but Mum is more sort of pastel colours, and I don't know if the hot pink is just kind of too hot pink for her. I bought a sort of pastel pink mohair that I'm holding the hot pink double with, thinking it might sort of mute it a little bit, and it sort of hasn't. It is still quite hot pink, so I don't know, I'd vaguely thought I'd give it to her for her birthday, but what I might do is she's coming up in July, so I might get her to try it on at that point and see if it's something she actually wants. Because if it's not something that she wants, then I'll either keep it for myself or I might stash it and gift it to someone else at some point. But I really enjoy knitting it. The Sophie shawl is such a nice pattern, it's so easy. The yarn is beautiful. It was de-stashed to me by my bestie Victoria. Hi Victoria, if you're listening. And it is, I want to say Black Elephant is the name of the yarn company, but I'll put it in the show notes. And it's lovely yarn, so I would definitely buy this yarn myself in the future. It's the same yarn I used for the Barbara balaclava, and then I held it double with either Drops Kid Silk or Drops Alpaca Silk. I can't remember which one. I think the alpaca. And the fabric is lovely, so yeah, would definitely knit with this yarn again. But I have just bought yarn to knit myself a sweater number 18, I think it is, from My Favourite Things Knitwear. I've not actually made anything from that pattern designer before, so I'm intrigued to see how that goes down. But I like her style. It's quite sort of Scandi minimalist type style. And I've wanted a sort of cabled or textured sort of cream, or I thought navy was my other option, wool sweater. I've wanted one of them for a while. I think that would be a real workhorse in my wardrobe. So when this pattern kind of crossed my path, I think originally from Emma Woolly Mammoth actually, because I think she's knit one, I thought, well, that ticks all my boxes. I would still quite like a cable knit sweater in the future, because I inherited a cable knit sweater from my granddad, which was too big for me because obviously my granddad was bigger than me. So I did a sort of gentle sewing alteration to make it a little bit more wearable. And I still feel sad about this, to be honest, because it was too long for me, obviously, because it was built for a bigger man. I think it was a men's XL. So I took it in at the sides, but I left the length as it was, because in my experience in editing or refashioning wool sweaters, it's quite difficult to, or I've found it quite difficult to shorten them in a way that doesn't make it obvious that they've been shortened, if that makes sense. Like, I've always found that if you try and shorten a wool sweater, you end up like a weird puffy bit where the body meets their bottom hem, for example. So I decided to leave the length as it was and just take it in slightly at the sides, but it meant it was really long, which then made it really difficult to wear because it stuck out the bottom of basically all of my coats except my wool coat, which my wool coat is already quite warm, and then this sweater was quite thick, so the pair of them together, it was like unbearably hot. Like, for all that Scotland is cold, it's not that cold, you know, it's not like I live in Alaska or something. So I never had kind of a reason to wear this thick cable knit sweater with this wool coat, and the cable knit sweater was also really too thick to go under any of my coats, so it was that awkward situation where the wool sweater was too thick to wear under a coat because none of my coats would easily do up over it, or they would do up but then you would look like you were bursting out of it, kind of thing, you know. And I would always be a bit worried about, am I going to kneel down or bend down and the zip's going to break because there's just too much strain, you know. So yeah, that wasn't very practical, and it stuck out the bottom, and it was difficult to wear because it was generally too hot. So I cut it up and I tried to shorten it, and then it was just exactly as I predicted, that I really struggled to shorten it in a way that didn't look stupid. And then, of course, it's like you shorten it, it looks dumb, so then you unpick it and you try again, and the wool fabric wasn't really that good for sort of cutting into multiple times and sewing multiple times. So then I tried several different ways of stabilising the hem, and it just got shorter and shorter. It looked dumber and dumber, and I got more and more frustrated and upset because I'd inherited this sweater from my granddad, so I wanted to kind of keep it and ideally wear it. In retrospect, I basically went down a rabbit hole, and what I probably should have done is just, before I cut into it, I should have just packed it away in a box and given myself some emotional space from it. But it felt like one of those problems where it just kept itching my brain, kind of thing, you know, you just can't leave it alone. And now, with the benefit of hindsight, I wish I'd just stopped at gently taking it in and leaving it long and then just worn it around the house. I think it would have been quite a nice sweater to just wear around the house on cold days. Not everything needs to be like something you can wear out of the house. So yeah, I'm upset with myself because, yeah, it was my granddad's and it was sentimental, but I cut it up and have incorporated it into my Hobbit robe. So it will live on, and I've still got some of the fabric left, so I'm sure I can incorporate that into other things in time. But yeah, you just look at something and you have sort of mixed feelings because you're like, I kind of ruined that and I feel guilty about it, and a bit ashamed that I didn't realise sooner what I was doing, and I just forced myself to continue beyond the point at which I probably should have done, and it just sort of upsets me a little bit. But all of that aside, I still want a cable knit or textured white sweater because I think that would be a really good workhorse in my wardrobe. And then my friend Rachel from my last job gifted me a sweater from her dad. I think her dad's ex-partner had knitted it for him 25 years ago, something like that, and he'd never worn it, so he was clearing out and gave it to Rachel. Rachel passed it to me, and it was enormous on me, but I unravelled it to use the yarn. If I'm honest, I'm not 100% sure the yarn is 100% wool, which would be my preference, but I think it's close enough. I think if it's a blend, it's probably 80% wool, 20% acrylic or whatever. And I'm going to hold it double with the Drops alpaca because I really like that yarn. So I bought that recently and I need to swatch for it, and then I can get that one on the needles, which would be very exciting. And it feels like a good time to start that project. Summer solstice has just gone. Not that I'm hurrying the summer along by any means, but obviously, days will be getting shorter from this point onwards. So starting to think about knitting big sweater projects feels a bit more appropriate than it maybe does at I don't know, early summer, which feels ridiculous to say, but I'm not the kind of person that plans my knitting particularly seasonally because it takes me so long to knit anything that if I was right, I'm knitting my autumn winter wardrobe now, it would be summer of the next year before I started finishing things. So, but yeah, I figure if I start this sweater now, there is a distinct possibility it might be done in time for me to wear it in the cooler weather, which would be amazing. I am starting to think, I'm looking at my knitwear collection, and I am starting to think, should I operate a bit of a one in, one out situation? Because some of my knitwear is looking a little bit sad and could possibly do with being retired, but it's so hard to get rid of things you've made, isn't it? And especially things that you've made and loved. I don't find it difficult to get rid of things I've made that didn't go well, because normally looking at them upsets or irritates me. So I find it fairly easy to if they're good enough quality but they just don't fit me, I tend to donate them. If they're not good enough quality, I tend to just recycle them, cut them up to reuse the fabric or the yarn, frog them if they yarn, obviously. But yeah, I've got a couple of sweaters that I don't really wear very much anymore, but I have really worn and loved in the past. So they're probably not good enough quality now to donate, but I wouldn't want to just get rid of them, so I don't really know what to do with them, to be honest. But what I might do is take my own advice and just pack them away into storage and see how I feel about them in the future. If I don't miss them for a year or two, then I've kind of got my answer that I either need to frog them or recycle them or whatever. But yeah, I do feel like I'm starting to get to the point where my sweater collection is a little bit excessive. It's not massive by any means, but my tastes have also changed, And some of my sweaters, like my green cable knit one, for example, I think I knit that, I want to say the best part of 10 years ago. So, whilst I'm very much pro keeping things and using them for as long as possible, the thing with clothing is your style changes, right? Your body shape changes, lots of things can change in a decade's period. That means you might not want to wear something so much anymore. So yeah, I'm going to, at some point in the next couple of months, go through my knitwear and sort of decide what can get packed away and what I'm more likely to wear this winter, autumn, winter. And then obviously if I pack stuff away and I don't miss it over the winter, then I've probably got my answer right, and then I can decide what to do with them in the sort of spring, summer of next year. But I am very excited to have a wool cable knit, or textured I should say, because sweater number 18 is not cable knit, sweater on the go. And then separately, I am knitting a snood for one of my bestie's kids. So It's very simple. It's just a ribbed tube, basically. I feel quite lazy because I probably could have worked out how to do this myself, but I couldn't be bothered. So I bought a vintage knitting pattern off Etsy for the princely sum of something like £1.80, which, side note, amazing business idea there. So I assume what this person does is thrift these knitting patterns, because I see them all the time in charity shops for mega cheap, scan them in a sort of high quality image and then sell the digital copy. And obviously you'd have to be careful that they're like out of copyright or whatever. But I mean, some of these are from the like 60s, 70s, 80s, so I can't imagine anyone cares anymore, you know. And then even if you're only selling them for £1.80, you know, you could sell infinite numbers of them. Not that there's infinite numbers of people out there that want to buy vintage knitting patterns, but you know what I mean? Like, for the very minimal upfront cost and time of scanning, like, yeah, I was like, that is a genius idea and I wish I'd thought about it. So I've picked this one. It's just basically a knitted ribbed tube. And I basically bought the pattern so that I wouldn't have to do the maths or the trial and error of working out how many stitches to cast on. And then I modified it. So the pattern recommendation is that it's knit in the flat and then seamed, which seems a bit silly. So I'm knitting it in the round, and I'm going to knit it twice the length and then do, I can't remember what the technique's called, but where you basically knit the two ends together. So you end up with like a double thickness tube. Because I think that'd be super snuggly, but it would also look quite professional as well, is what I'm hoping. So that is my plan. And it's kind of perfect, just like brainless TV knitting. It is a little bit annoying because it's knit one, purl one, which I like how it looks. I don't love knitting it because I tend to find after a while it makes my wrists sore. So I actually stopped. I was knitting this and watching Emma Woolly Mammoth, and then my wrist was getting sore, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to stop and record a podcast and then go back to knitting for a bit. So yeah, that is where I'm at with knitting. And despite saying this wasn't a gardening episode, you got a garden update anyway. And yeah, currently not sewing at all, to be honest. My sewing machines, there's just nowhere to put them out at the moment. So up until last week, we didn't actually have a functioning downstairs part of our house other than the kitchen. So I put everything back to rights on Friday. So we now have a functioning living room / dining room. So that's really nice to have that back to normal, and I'm sitting on the sofa right now watching TV. But yeah, there is definitely no space. Sorry, yawning again. There is definitely no space for sewing at the moment, which is a bummer. But equally, I feel like I've got so much stuff on that I'm not really missing it. I could do with some new jeans, to be honest, but I might just suck it up and go buy them like a normal person. Which is slightly annoying because I know I've got denim in my stash and I know what pattern I would make, but I don't have the time or energy right now, so I might just take myself off into town and try on some trousers at Marks and Spencer at some point. But yeah, otherwise, I think that's it for now. Happy Solstice to those who, I was about to say to those who celebrate, but you know, solstice happens to everybody. So happy longest day of the year. And I hope wherever you are, the sun is shining, or if it's raining, it is filling your water butts and your knitting is going well. And I will speak to you all soon. All right, bye.